So first of all, as Tino asked, I will just introduce myself briefly. I'm a sociologist of culture based in Belgium at the University of Antwerp in Belgium, the Diamond City. And I do already for, I think, 20 years research on creative labor, cultural policy, cultural heritage also, and also civil action more these days, and cultural politics in general. Yeah, I've published on this several books. Maybe interesting for you is are several titles, but when I heard who is in the room, I think No Culture, No Europe is maybe an interesting title for you to look at once. But today, as I understood it well, was asked me to talk about, especially about cultural heritage and memory, and how it affects, how digitalization affects our memory and our cultural values also. So that's why I've chosen this title. It's something which I was busy already a long time ago, and I opened this research just a few days, or no, 2 weeks ago, I think, again, especially because of COVID-19 and the enormous boom of digitalization, digital meetings, digital cultural performances, etc. I was wondering, what is digitalization? What is the effect of it on our culture, cultural productions, but also on our appreciations, our values, our attitudes in general? I've written also a very small book, which was also translated in Ukraine about this, called Nearness, together with philosopher Marlies de Munk, in which we discuss also digitalization and the effect on education, and also the effect of not having a live experience in theater or in performances in general. But so now I will focus on this discussion more related to memory and how we present cultural values, and especially how we memorize cultural events in the past, and what will be the future of that. So that's the reason for this title, the digital memory and the origin of the narcissistic chronotope. Let me say first something a little bit about heritage, and especially the whole ideas about how we remember events nowadays, and how they also are culturally represented. And I was very much inspired by the philosophy of George Simmel about this, and especially his book, The Philosophy of History, in which he says, if something is important, then importance must be ascribed or attached to it. In other words, it is important because the historian is interested in it. So for him, it's very important that an event is not important just as such, or an historical event also is not important just as such. It just becomes important because somebody attributes in the present, and this is, I think, very important, in the present, ascribes to it an importance. So the consequence of this idea is that not what is said is important, but how something is said determines the chances of connection between an historical event and the present. So this is also very much how memory works. It is not that we just associate with an event in the past. It is how it is presented to us nowadays that we can remember or make associations with it. Another very important insight of George Simmel is that he says causality in history is consistent, and consistency, sorry, can only be experienced, not objectively observed. So it is part of a narrative, it's part of an experience. It cannot be objectively observed. You can objectively detect historical facts, like Second World War, etc. That's not the point. But the relationship between different events always are part of interpretation and need to be built up and constructed again and again and again. What is, in fact, mostly of the time the work of historians, I think. So historical coherence is a result of interpretation, and that's the main point. The sounds may be blunt, but you need to be aware that George Simmel has written this already in the at the end of the 19th century. What was at that moment, I think, quite provocative to think about that. Anyway. What I try to do now is to look at how we memorize, how we rethink historical events in the past, how this was done in the past, and how we do this nowadays. And for this, I use the theory of Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian theoretician, literary scientist also, who talks about chronotopes. And the most important insight for me, and I use it, I applied in my way, how he elaborated this, is that the importance of spatio-temporal grid for staging and reading history is very important. So the so-called modern memory or modern memory work is always based on time and space and the connection between those two. So how we are memorizing things is organized in a way by time and space. And what is important is for Mikhail Bakhtin is that he says that time and space are symmetrical and interdependent. So that means that it sounds abstract, but I will make it very concrete in a second. That means that the space in which we are walking, are living, etc., very much affects our feeling of time, our interpretation also of time, but also the time we experience has an effect on how we behave in a space. And so this interrelationship is very important to think about how we deal with cultural values, how we deal with history, historical facts. So time and space are unconditionally connected in his eyes. I try to connect this now with culture and especially cultural values, and this is based on a research we have done for the Flemish government, and their research question was very basic: was what is the value of culture, and what values are in culture, and why is it important? Of course, also to subsidize, etc. Yeah, we explore this, and I try to define then also in a very classical way what is culture for us. But especially, and I think this is more interesting for you, is how what are the different functions culture has, and especially cultural actors play a very important role in this. But first of all, I define culture in an anthropological sense as a way of life. So it's not just about art, it is about attitudes, about values, about norms, and what we think is important. But more specific, and this is, I think, also the main value of culture, is that culture gives us a meaning. It gives a meaning to our lives. It makes sense of our lives, and it is also a tool, even culture, to make sense of our society in which we are living. So of the social context, the ecological context, the economical context, political context in which we are living. And this is, of course, a traditional definition of culture, which was already set up by Sigmund Freud, for example, but also by Heidegger, who said, who answered the question, why do we have culture? By his blunt statement, Zeit zum Tode. Because we know we are dying, we have culture. And that's also the reason for culture. When we know we are dying, of course, we ask ourselves the question, what's the sense of our life? And then the whole sense-making process, which is culture, starts. I just give this very basic definition or basic insight also, because I think this immediately shows the very importance and the very value of culture. But at the same time, it shows also, it explains where cultural actors going from museums, artists, but also teachers are busy with. And in fact, they are busy with what I think what I call three functions for culture. And the first one is socialization. That means that you try to integrate people, young people, but also, for example, refugees in a country. You try to integrate them in the social values, the culture, as it is. So this is the whole process of socialization. So you try to connect people with and make them familiar with the social order, with the habits, attitudes which are going on there. And this process of socialization is, in fact, a process without questioning this process or without questioning the social order in which you are integrated. So I always say to my students, socialization starts already with the decision of a mother when she decides to give a bottle of milk or the breast. That's already a cultural decision. And of course, the baby cannot make a decision in that. It's the mother who decides. So socialization is very much the integration in the culture, in the social order, without you have the opportunity to question the social order. But this is a basic thing. What cultural actors do is really socializing. It's giving people ground under their feet to stand on. And this is a very important thing. So you need this also. You need to be socialized to get order in your life, to get orientation points, etc. So, and I think this is one of the main reasons of existence, I think, of cultural actors in general. A second thing, what cultural actors do is the whole process of qualification. Qualification means that you make value hierarchies. For example, making an art historical canon is a typical one. So it means qualification. It means making an order, and it means also I'm for example busy with qualification as a professor. Always when I give grades to my students, I say this paper is better written than that paper. So you make always a kind of hierarchy in it. This is the process of qualification, which is also a main function, I think, of cultural. It's a main function of cultural actors to do. The last one is, for me, important and very much related to the arts, is the process of subjectification. Subjectification, metaphorically, I say, always happens when you are hidden in the face. For example, when you read a novel or when you go to an exhibition and you start questioning, you are maybe shocked, but you start questioning your own way of being. Yeah? So this means also in the process of subjectification, you start maybe questioning the social order in which you are socialized. And this is the whole dynamics in culture. So I think you need all the three functions in the culture, and you need also cultural actors who are busy with those three functions. But there need to be also a balance, a kind of balance between those three, and especially between socialization and subjectification. There needs to be a kind of dialectic. Socialization, again, means that you are integrated without questions in a social order, and subjectification means that you are confronted with alternative visions, new performances, new ways of being, which can question your own sense of life, but also can question the social order or the country, the national culture in which you are socialized. And I think this game is played by cultural actors, and I call it also a cultural value game. It's constantly dealing with games, playing with games, trying to integrate new values, etc. And now I try to relate this, and this is already, I think, my last slide, to again to memory and to cultural memory, and how cultural actors deal with this. And that I call again chronotopias, in that sense that what I will show here is a kind of what Max Weber would call ideal types of how we memorize things, and how culture functions in this. For making this kind of chronotopia or ideal types, I make a distinction which I borrowed from Michel de Certeau. He makes a distinction between strategy and tactique, and place and space. Strategy is for him long-term planning. It's made by power organizations, like, for example, in the beginning, in the quote of George Simmel, he definitely gives this power to the historian. He says the historian can develop a kind of history, and can develop also kind of strategy to present this. Tactical use is how people then use this communication about histories, events, etc., and even maybe abuse, reuse it, and put them in their own favor sometimes. So tactical tactical use is mostly of a non-power position. It comes from bottom up, and it is how people respond to strategies. Another distinction he made is between place and space. Place is a fixed place. That means when a building is standing on a place, there can be no other building on this place. So it is fixed, also fixed in time. It's very important. And space is liquid. It can change. It changes every time by the use. For example, a marketplace is defined in a strategic sense by a government for the market, a square, for example, in the city, but it is unplaced, as Michel de Certeau would say, and made a space of it when, for example, skaters come in and use the square in a different way than what it was meant for. I use this kind of opposites to make this grid, and to try to make a kind of typology of chronotopes. And the first one, which is mentioned, and it's interesting what was said from the side of Belarus, because I think this plays a very important role in our play with values and cultural values nowadays. Again, in such situations, it's what I call local memory. Local memory is built up by a fixed place. So, for example, the geopolitical geography of a nation state between the borders, and in this location, or for this location, mostly in a kind of chronological way, so in a linear way, a history is told, and this history is mostly of the time his story, so of male heroes or events, heroic events, which took place. And this is translated classical in art and in art institutions in monumental buildings, monumental opera houses, monumental museums, but also, of course, in national statues in cities, etc. So this really works with a kind of this kind of strategy of memorizing is very much based on fixed places, huge statues, and is strategically planned in such a national context. I think most of you are familiar with this way of dealing with cultural values and historical events. Another one comes in, let's say, starting from the 1970s, and it's what I call the chronotope of global time, which we saw. That's why I mentioned this as an example. We also often define as the Disneyfication of history. What does this mean? That means that every time, in every place, the same kind of experience of a kind of pastness history is shown. Like in Disneyland, you have this, for example, you get, for example, an impression of a time space, but you really don't know in which time it was. So it is not a kind of rational timeline in which things are framed. It's only the kind of experience of pastness which counts, and which gives you exactly this experience to get into. So it's what I call global time, because you can share it everywhere, but it's also everywhere the same. We see this also with the promotion very much, I think, of let's say in the whole history of contemporary art. We see those change of Guggenheim, for example, the Guggenheim Museum, etc., which everywhere in the world, or everywhere where they place their museum, define the same art historical canon. So this is also kind of globalization of a kind of cultural history in different places. So they make, in a way, our history homogeneous, and also our cultural values. They try to make our cultural values homogeneous. A response to that, often of museums, but also of historians, often is try to reflect on this, and this starts certainly also in the 1980s with the whole discussion of postmodernism, but also multiculturalism, is saying that every local place has its own time experience, and they try to reflect this on this also. So what they say is that time is not experiences, and also historical events, culture is not experience at every place at the same way, and this makes us also reflect about localities and different localities, and how they frame again when you move from one place to another. How can they can also reframe our time experience and the experience of our cultural events. What I try to put a little bit provocative nowadays, today, just for this occasion, is try to understand what is now the effect, and how can we also understand and place our digital memory in this, and how does digitalization has an effect on the way we experience time and space. As you all know, of course, and this meeting is even a good example of this, is that we are hanging now at this moment somewhere in space. We of course we are located in locations, but this is irrelevant to meet. So we are in a kind of of course, a virtual space, but this affects very much our experience of time, because in this kind of digital space, the only thing which defines our time experience is that we are connected at this moment together. And this makes the time frame and our time experience. So it is in a way disconnected of the place in which we are living at the moment. I don't know. I think there were no people of the United States, but there is already a small time difference between Belgium and Ukraine. I know 1 hour. But when we were sometimes I have also meetings with people in the United States or conferences, etc. So and then you see that time, their local time, does not matter anymore. Right? We are all in the same moment in the digital space, which defines our experience of that. That's one thing. So, and that can be a beautiful thing. I think also digitalization offers us enormous advantages, for example, to search for alternative histories, for example, alternative values, to detect them, etc. But the problem is that it is used, this kind of digital tools, more and more nowadays in what I call a very narcissistic way. And what I mean by this is that individuals build up their own history and try to define their own experience or project their own experience in what they can find about history and cultural events on the internet. So they really look to cultural experiences and cultural values also, which mirror themselves. And what for me is very interesting in this is that this means that there is also a kind of shift in authority. Who can say something about what is important and what is not important? When we go back to the local memory and the nation state, we all know, of course, first of all, it is the historian who plays a very important authoritarian role, but of course also politics in the selection, in the construction of a cultural historical canon. So the authority there is collective. It's in a global time discussion. So in the Disneyfication, it is capital. It's money which makes and can define. Big companies who can define or experience. So it's also collective, but the most important incentive or authority comes from finance, from capital and the economy. In the global time definition, I think it's again, the authority is given to the expert. Again, the historian, I think I mentioned already, but also theorians, philosophers, sociologists, anthropologists, very important, mediators, who try to, try to compensate nation-state politics, but also this global time rhetorics of capital. Try to nuance this, try to criticize this also. What happens in digital time is, in fact, the only authority comes from the individual itself, who tries to build up her or his own history. So in that sense, it is also narcissistic, because there is no, the possibility is there that there is no relationship anymore to an authority. And again, I mean, but with authority, a very positive thing, not authoritarian or something like that. I think you need a kind of authority who especially has an influence in this kind of process of socialization, qualification, and subjectification. So to resume and relate it back to those three functions of culture, when you look at local memory, you see that the authority is and the function of culture is very much related to the process of qualification and socialization. This is very much stressed. The integration in the national culture is the most important aim, I would say, of nation-state politics and local memory. In global time, it's not anymore about qualification, but it is about socialization in a global economical network. When you look at global time, it is much more about subjectification. It is making people aware of their position and that they are enrolled in the social order by processes of socializations, etc. While in digital time, you see what rests there is only the process of subjectification, from this point of view, you can call it also the frog perspective, but a very individualistic perspective is looked to again to social order. So this gives also the feeling that people can make their own social order, which is of course not true. It makes also kind of disorders because people are not, they don't feel grounded anymore in a kind of culture with fixed values, etc. Because the lack of this process of socialization in this digital time circuit. So that's only, I know it sounds maybe a little bit abstract, but I hope it can open the discussions about dealing with values and so on. So I stop the sharing of the screen now and hope we can come back for the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pascal. I hope my sound is good at the moment. Thank you very much.